One question that is exceedingly important for the study of personality concerns the extent to which is the result of nature or nurture. If nature is more important, then our personalities will form early in our lives, and it will be difficult to change later. If nurture is more important, then our experiences are likely to be particularly more important, and we may be able to flexibly alter our personalities over time. In this video, we will see that personality traits of humans and animals are determined in large part by their genetic makeup, and thus it's no surprise that identical twins, Paula Bernstein and Elise Shane, turn out to be very similar, even though they had been raised separately. But we will also see that genetic does not determine everything. In the nucleus of each cell in your body are 23 pairs of chromosomes. One of each pair comes from your mother and the other comes from your father. The chromosomes are made up of strands of the molecule DNA, and the DNA is grouped into segments known as genes. A gene is a basic biological unit that transmits the characteristics from one generation to the next. Human cells have about 25,000 genes. The genes of different members of the same species are almost identical. The DNA in your genes, for instance, is about 99.9% the same as the DNA in my genes, and in the DNA of every other human being. These common genetic structures lead members of the same species to be born with a variety of behaviors that come naturally to them and that define the characteristics of the species. These abilities and characteristics are known as instincts. Different animals have different instincts. Birds naturally build nests. Dogs are naturally loyal to their human caretakers. And humans instinctively learn to walk and to speak and understand language. But the strength of different traits and behaviors also varies within species. Rabbits are naturally fearful, but some of them are more fearful than others. Some dogs are more loyal than others, and some humans learn to write and speak better than others do. These differences are determined in part by small amount of the differences in genes among the members of other species. Personality is not determined by any single gene, but rather by the action of many genes working together. There is no IQ gene that determines intelligence, and there is no good marriage partner gene that makes a person a particularly good marriage bet. Furthermore, even working together, genes are not so powerful that they can control and create our personality. Some genes tend to increase the characteristics, and others work to decrease that same characteristic. The complex relationship among the various genes, as well as a variety of random factors, produce the final outcome. Even more, genetic factors always work together with environmental factors to create our personality. Having a given pattern of the genes doesn't necessarily mean that a particular trait will develop, because some traits might develop only in some environments. For example, a person might have a genetic variant that is known to increase his or her emphysema for smoking. But if that person never smokes, the emphysema most likely will not develop. What matters more when it comes to personality, nature or nurture? Just how much does your DNA influence your personality? Researchers have spent decades studying family, twins, adopted children, and foster families to better understand how much of our personality is genetic and how much is environmental. Both nature and nurture can play a role in personality, although large-scale twin studies suggest that there is a strong genetic component. While the exact degree varies depending on the trait, genetic does have an influence on personality. Twins and adoption studies indicates that human personality is around 30 to 60% heritable. This certainly does not mean that environment does not play a role in shaping our personality. Personality traits are complex, and researchers suggest that genetic and environmental factors shape traits. These two forces act in a way that form our individual personalities. One of known and interesting case, Elise Shane and Paula Bernstein, twins that were separated at birth. They met for the first time when they were 35, and they found that they were identical strangers. Their separation wasn't an accident, it was a part of a secret psychological experiment. Their upbringings couldn't have been more different. Paula had grown up in a middle-class Jewish family in New York, while Elise was raised in Paris by a more affluent family, surrounded by art and culture. Yet there were a lot of similarities between them. The career interests, some habits, and fashion sense, and even taste and preference has raised the question whether this was genetically influenced. However, we can't miss the part with the differences between them. First and foremost, personality. Paula was described as more outgoing and sociable, while Elisa was more introvert and introspective. The educational background and the academic choices were very different. And what's interesting is the emotional response to the experiment. When they discovered their separation and the nature of the study, they reacted differently. Paula was more analytical and sought to understand the situation, while Elisa expressed more emotional distress about the ethics of the experiment. Their story illustrates how identical twins who share the same DNA can exhibit significant differences when raised in different environments. However, their similarities point to the powerful role of the genetics in shaping certain aspects of personality, preferences, and even mental health. Human behavior is a subject to genetic variation. The ways in which individuals differ in their intellectual abilities, personalities, and mental health are, to a large extent, functions of their inherited genetic predispositions. Decades of researches on twins, adoptees, and families have led to the inescapable conclusion that most reliable measure psychological characteristics are influenced to some degree by genes. Behavior also shows some signs of genetic influence. The way one experiences stressful life events shows some genetic influence. Even personal aspects of individuals, such as spirituality and political ideology, are affected to an extent by genes. It should come as no surprise, then, that genes influence the way in which families function and how family members relate to one another. Familial relationship of all kinds, parent-child, siblings, or spouse, can be shown to be at least partially the product of genetic factors. Findings from behavioral genetic research have broadly impacted modern understanding of genetic role and environmental influences on behavior. These include evidence that nearly all researched behaviors are under a significant degree of genetic influence, and that influence tends to increase as individuals develop into adulthood. Further, most researched human behaviors are influenced by a large number of genes, and the individual effects of these genes are very small. Environmental influence also plays a strong role, but they tend to make family members more different from one another. Genes influence each individual behavioral and psychological characteristics, including intellectual ability, personality, and risk for mental illness, all of which have bearing on both parents and children within a family. The way in which genes and environment can affect parent-child can be seen in this picture. This model represents a standard way in which behavioral geneticists think about human behavior in the context of family relationships. Parents' genes influence their own behavior, including the ways they parent their children, and children's genes influence their own behavior, including the ways they respond to their parents. The transmission of genes from parent to child is one important link that will lead to similarities between the behavior of a parent and child. To an extent that gene predispose an individual towards aggressive behavior, including violence towards others. Parents and children will show similarities in this area of behavior. This might offer another explanation for the cycle of violence, in which abusive parenting is related to aggression and other antisocial behavior in children. Antisocial behavior does, in fact, show moderate genetic influence in a wide range of studies. Besides direct genetic transmission, the model in the picture 1 indicates two other important ways in which the behavior of parents and children may be linked. First, parental behavior may itself be an important aspect of the child's environment, which may be considered a form of cultural transmission. For example, a mother's intelligence, personality, and mental health may have an impact on the child's environment. Mothers with higher intelligence and education spend more time reading to their children and engaging them in stimulating activities. Importantly, however, these characteristics may each be influenced by the mother's genetic makeup, and thus it can be seen how the mother's genotype may ultimately be associated with the child's environment. Over the past 2 decades, the scientists have made substantial progress in understanding the important role of genetics in behavior. Behavioral genetic studies have found that, for the most traits, genetics is more important than parental influence, and molecular genetic studies have begun to pinpoint the particular genes that are causing these differences. The results of these studies might lead you to believe that your destiny is determined by your genes, but this would be a mistaken assumption. For one, the results of all research must be understood correctly. Over time, we will learn even more about the role of genetics, and our conclusion about its influence will likely change. Current research in the area of behavioral genetics is often criticized of making assumptions about how researchers categorize identical and fraternal twins. about whether twins are in fact treated in the same way by their parents, and about many other issues. Although these critiques may not change the overall conclusion, it must be kept in mind that these findings are relatively new and will certainly be updated over time. Furthermore, it is important to reiterate that although genetics is important, and although we are learning more every day about many personality variables, genetics does not determine everything. In fact, the major influence on personality is non-shared environmental influences, which include all the things that happen to us that makes us unique individuals. These differences include variability in brain structure, nutrition, education, upbringing, and even interactions among the gene itself. These genetic differences that exist at birth may be either amplified or diminished over time through environmental factors. The brain and bodies of identical twins are not exactly the same, and they become even more different as they grow up. As a result, even genetically identical twins have distinct personalities, resulting a large part from environmental effects. Because these non-shared environmental differences are non-systematic and largely accidental or random, it will be difficult to ever determine exactly what will happen to a child as he or she grows up. Although we do inherit our genes, we do not inherit personality in any fixed sense. The effect of our genes on our behavior is entirely dependent on the context of our life as it unfolds day to day. Based on your genes, no one can say what kind of human being you are, or will turn out to be, or what you will do in life. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.